valuation, on average have higher contemporaneous market valuation, superior future earnings, operating performance, market valuation, and stock returns. So we find is those companies that are more efficient in being able to innovate, to deliver products and services, grow and are more valuable as a company. Now, if I go even at the next level, what we find is even countries where companies are more innovative actually benefit as well. So we see countries where innovative companies are actually located, they also see their fortunes move up. So countries which host firms with higher innovation have higher economic growth. As a matter of fact, we see there's some good evidence already coming out, which shows that those countries where they're actually able to increase the amount of innovation from their companies also see an increase in their economic growth. So we start to see is our ability to innovate, our ability to develop products, our ability to produce new services is a critical piece, not just for our business, but even for our nations. So let's take a look at what this actually shows. So what I'm showing here, this is a graph, and this is pulling data from a data set that was put together by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And what they do is they, based on their the audits and things that they do, they put out what companies spend in R&D on an annual basis and what their revenue is. And so what we're seeing here is the top or the largest 1,000 public companies worldwide. And this is simply just plotting what they spend versus the revenue of the company. And what you see in the center there, that best fit line, that's basically just showing the slope of 16.43. What that's saying is that on average, 1,000 biggest companies worldwide, for every dollar they spend in R&D, they return $16.43. So, all right, that might be somewhat interesting, but what we're really seeing here is a plot of dots, which really has, which is just a mix, and we really can't see much out of it. Now, it becomes very interesting when we actually start looking at this across industries. So this is a data, it's somewhat culled down a little bit. So this is the data which shows what are the returns by industry grouping. So you see the various different colors showing various different industries. Now, what this is looking at is similar to the previous one. This is what gets invested, and then 3 years later, what the revenue is. So this starts to look at a flow across various different industry segments, what the spending is, and then in return, what they expect for revenue from their businesses. And so we start seeing some very interesting phenomena. What we're starting to see is that the R&D returns are very characteristic by industry groupings. And so you can see, for example, along the bottom there, the bluish or the yellowish colors. That's a pharmaceutical. That's the areas where we typically see a tremendous amount of investment in R&D. But we also see relatively little return when it comes to the investment they put in place. So what we're seeing is that there's a characteristic, there's a return expectation based on the industry groupings that you may have. So let's dig into that a little bit deeper. Although there's variation and there's an expectation within an industry, we do see that there's tremendous variation within industries. So this is looking at food products sector, and we're seeing that what was spent in 2015, and then 3 years later, what the revenue return is. And by the way, picked a 3-year just to be kind of a generic. Some companies are much faster in return, some are slower. So it's kind of an industry, it's kind of a norm in order to keep everything consistent. But now what you're seeing is you're starting to identify separation even within an industry, how different companies operate. And in this case, we're seeing that the return rate in the food and product sector is 57. So in this case, our expectation would be for every dollar invested in R&D in the food sector, we would get $57 back. Now, you can see over on the left-hand side, you can see some of these companies like Archer Daniels Midland that do significantly better. They invest much less but they have much greater returns. So this starts to become a little bit interesting. We start saying, okay, are there other segments? I just picked two of them for now. And so this is industrial conglomerates. In this, looking at the same thing, 2015 versus 2018. Now what you're seeing is a slope of about 22. So we're again seeing consistency within the industry. We're seeing variation within the industry. So we're seeing a $22 return rather than what we saw previously, about twice that. But what we're starting to see is that within an industry, there's characteristics, but even within industry, different companies can break out of those. So we're also seeing that if we look at this over various different time scales, we're seeing that companies don't necessarily move a whole lot. We're seeing that they have fairly consistent performance over time. And here what we're looking at is aerospace and defense, and we're seeing 3 different years. We're seeing investments in 2013, 2014, and 2015, and the actual returns in 16, 17, and 18. So again, we're doing a 3-year change. And what we're seeing here is a return rate of about 22, almost $23. So for every dollar spent in R&D, that's the return that's expected. Now we're starting to see some very interesting things. What we're starting to see is that these companies are starting to be fairly consistent within an industry, which takes us to the question of how would you change position? And this is really coming back to the original question, which is what is it within product development? What is it within the innovation process that would allow us to be more successful? So when we talk about changing, I want to take a moment and talk about lean product development and just look at the focus for a moment. Many of us may have grown up in lean in the manufacturing space or in operations of some other type. And when we look at this, and this is data which is extracted from a study that was done at Ford Motor Company some time ago, but it's looking at where is the cost that's associated with various different products. And if you look along the bottom here, we can see that the design side is about 5% of the total cost of the car. The material, so the steel, the raw materials, as well as the parts that go into it, is about 50% of the cost. The cost to put it together is about 15%. And then the overhead, the machines, the equipment, the factories is about 30% of the cost. And so when we think about lean and we think about waste reduction, we think about a focus on eliminating waste, it makes a lot of sense to be focusing in this area of material and labor and overhead. Now, if we look at the influence that these various different areas have on the impact of the business, meaning how much can they actually control, we can see that material is probably the highest out of this with about 20%. And that could be from selecting different materials, it could be from different suppliers, various different things like that. But what we see is over here on this side here is that the greatest impact that we have in the future performance of our business is really on the design side. And what we find, unfortunately, many organizations, when they look at how do we improve the innovation process of product development, they take the same approach and start saying, well, I need to reduce my cost and look at my waste. When we look at a 5% differential versus a 70%, that's really looking perhaps at the wrong area. So what we look at is how do we really focus on the value? Now, that's not to say there's not waste in design. There's tremendous waste in design, but that comes out automatically when we focus on the value side. And so what we're looking to do is say, where do we create value and how do we create value in the design process? And that's really what we want to look at when we start saying, how would we be able to shift these companies from one position to another? And so if we look at that, we can go back to research. We can go back to some of these studies. What framework might we want to use as we start looking at improving the value when it comes to design or the engineering side of things? Now, this is looking at a study that was done by Hopman, Zurich, Dombrowski, and Zahn. And what they did in their study is they went through Google Scholar and they looked at all of the articles, all of the scholarly articles, all the research that had been done along the search terms of lean product development, lean innovation. And what they found out of that by doing this sorting through all the literature, and by the way, there's thousands of articles that have been written, what they've come out with is 11 components or 11 areas that they're proposing as being important in the literature reviews. And so I've got these listed here. They talk about strong project manager, specialist career path, workload leveling, responsibility-based planning and control, cross-project knowledge transfer, simultaneous engineering, supplier integration, product variety management, rapid prototyping, process standardization, and set-based engineering. So this is all very interesting to see what we're finding in the literature and the research that's been going on. Now, most of the research that we find is actually studying companies like Toyota, not necessarily looking at an organization and following them through their path. But it starts to give us kind of an idea of what types of frameworks we might be thinking about as far as those things that we want to go after. Now, if we look at some additional research, this is from Leon and Ferris, and Leon and Ferris actually went a little bit deeper, and they actually went into specific literature reviews. And what they've done is they've actually gone out and they've extracted these various different proposals of what possible frameworks might be for a lean product development approach or an ability to move these companies. And what you see here is there's a couple structures, a couple frameworks they've done just purely on lean product development. You see at the top there studies from Leiker and Morgan from 2006. You've seen the work from Womack on lean design. You see work from Carlson and Alstrom. You see the work from Dr. Ward. They've also looked at product development frameworks from Kahn, and they've also proposed some things on their own. And so what we see as we start digging into some of this research is there are some ideas, some thoughts, some positions out there as to what the key attributes might be when it comes to how do you move these companies. So having done that, what we talked about yesterday was kind of synthesizing all this research. We really didn't have the chance to talk about where these ideas come from. But what I'm showing here is a framework that is being proposed, which is called 7+1, which is synthesizing all the research as well as applying real world applications. So looking at actually what's been working and what, in this case, what I've been able to do at companies and put that into a framework. I'm not going to spend the time to go through in detail here as we did it yesterday, but if there's people who have an interest, feel free to send me a note and I'd be happy to share more details around the various different pieces of the framework. So the question at this point then becomes, is this framework actually valid? And so what I'm showing here is, again, going back to the original research that we're looking at with the studies on what companies invest. And we're looking at the energy equipment and service sector. So this is companies that provide equipment and services to the oil and gas industry primarily. I've taken the company names off because company C is one that we've been working with. And so what we see here again is that their return is about $27. So every dollar invested in R&D, they get $27 back. And we can also see that there's fairly consistent across the industry. We see probably company A is probably doing better than the rest, but company C, the one that's in that we've been looking at, is fairly good. It's fairly good. And so what happens when we start putting these principles in place? So here's some work, and we're actually showing on the right-hand side a distribution, and we talked a little about this yesterday. We're seeing a distribution shift in their ability to deliver projects. And so in starting to go through this effort, what we're starting to see is they've already been able to reduce their time to market by 265 days. And if we look at the left there, I've kind of laid out some of these improvements, 42% reduction in project duration, which was their biggest issue in their competition. Being able to get products out, 65% reduction in standard deviation, 66% increase in projects delivered. Now, because of the time frame, we don't see these returns yet coming through on the business side because it's a 3-year lag. But we're seeing on the leading indicators that they're having tremendous impact on their business already. And knowing the inside workings of the company, we know that they're already coming back as tremendous revenue improvements for the business already. So we're starting to see, even on starting to apply some of these principles, that we can indeed have an impact on the business. So The other thing that this starts to do as we start putting a framework in place is that we're actually able to evaluate progress. We're able to evaluate where a particular business is at. So these are some questions that are laid out with regard to one of those framework areas to help us start to understand where are various different companies at in their journey to becoming lean or their journey to be able to improve in their ability to create revenue. And we're able to do that then and actually do a pictorial and say, okay, we can measure where a particular company is at with regard to these various different areas. And then we can actually implement and we can start putting changes in place to actually start putting them step by step wise, move them in a way that we can start getting the company to be more effective. So um, that's kind of my 20 minutes. I wanted to at least, I wanted to spend a little bit of time to share and hopefully motivate you to think about where's my company at? How is my company moving? And how would I move my company in respect to my return on my R&D investment, especially considering how important it is for the company as well as even your particular environment. And I really like the fact that we're tied in here with the Lean Association of Finland, and I see a lot of local people and local companies. The work that you're doing is not just for your company. The work that you're doing is actually for your community as well. Because you will see as the companies that you represent become more effective, you as an economy will also have an impact. So thank you for your time. I hope it was useful to you. If you have any questions, you'd like to reach out to me. If you'd like more information, um, my passion is to share. I really am passionate about this, and feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to share information as well. Thank you.